Good afternoon and welcome to this joint MDB session, Moving from Principles to Practice, an update on MDB support for a just transition. My name's Kate Hughes. I'm a Principal Climate Change Specialist at the Asian Development Bank and very happy to be here at this event today. In October 2021, the MDBs agreed a set of joint high-level principles on just transition. 2 years have passed since then, and I think we can all agree that the topic of just transition has really grown in discussions and prominence. And so it's a good opportunity for us to come together today and give you an update on what we have done as institutions and collaboratively to move forward on that agenda. So to start off, I'm very pleased to welcome Barbara Rambousek, the Director of Gender and Economic Inclusion from EBRD, to offer some welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope you can all hear me. I will try and speak loud enough for this event today. So thank you very much for coming today. I'm really pleased to welcome you today to this event, Moving from Principles to Practice, which is so important and very much the theme, I think, also of the COP. You know, it's beyond the pledges, it's actually about action. We know that we need to focus on a just transition if we want to really tackle the huge challenge that climate change poses to us. It's about involving people. It's about giving people an opportunity to have a share in the new economy, in the new emerging green economy. Because we know that if they don't, they are not going to give us the political, the economic mandate to make the fundamental changes in terms of how we live and work that are so necessary. So this just transition in a way, this focus on people and focusing on green investments is two sides of the same coin and need to come together. So as Katie has mentioned, in 2021, we agreed on the high-level principles. We articulated and harmonized our approaches. Last year, we reaffirmed those and also specifically agreed to focus on action and joint action. And today we're here to look at what we have actually achieved to date. So it's actually a very, very important milestone. The challenge is complex. At EBRD, we've recently launched our new transition report, which is our flagship publication every year. And we specifically looked at what is the sort of impact on labor markets, what is the impact on people as part of the green economy transition. And what we found is that although green jobs tend to be better paid, it's actually this transition is very, very slow because it takes time to build the right skills in the labor market within the workforce in order to allow people to transition into those new jobs. We also know that the benefits of and the access to these green jobs is not equal for everybody. We know that higher skilled workers actually see a premium in their salaries, in their wages as a result of the move to green jobs. But we also know that those with lower skills in lower paid occupations do not see that. And we actually also used our Life in Transition survey to understand what is the attitude of people to the green economy transition. And we see people in lower paid jobs with lower skills being a lot more skeptical and not really buying into those reforms that are so needed. So I think there is a very, very strong imperative as a result to really act on a just and green transition. So joint action is key. And coordinated action is also key. And this is where country level platforms can really provide a huge and important basis in order to launch actions for us. They shift away from a project by project approach. They actually bring together key partners from investors to policymakers, to communities, to donors, and they forge joint action to really get targeted large-scale investments. They also support the development of regional just transition action plans, and very importantly, they help mobilize those investments that are so needed. Let me just briefly give you two examples of where we as EBRD have been working with many other colleague MDBs together, as well as regional, local stakeholders and investors. One is the famous NUAFI, the nexus of water, food, energy, and there's one more. Water, food, that's it. The next water, food, and energy. So EBRD is leading on the energy side, and the aim of NUAFI in Egypt is to decommission 5 gigawatt worth of coal-fired power plants and actually commission 10 gigawatt worth of renewables. And very importantly, just transition measures, i.e. the focus on people, communities, reskilling, upskilling, redeployment of affected workers has to be directly part of those measures. We have already financed 1.7 gigawatt worth of renewable in Egypt and slated the closure 1 gigawatt worth of fossil fuel plants. So movement is actually happening, and we have started to assess the just transition and skills mapping that is needed in order to ensure that the workers that are directly affected can be redeployed. In North Macedonia, very excitingly, we just launched a new country level platform 2 days ago. It's a just energy transition plan. And the aim is to add 1.7 gigawatt worth of renewable capacity and retire all coal-fired power plants by 2030. This again is a big platform that works and operates on the basis of joint investment, joint activity, and joint operations across different MDBs. So these country level platforms are really key. And I think it's really something, a lesson that we have learned. The other lesson, of course, is, as I said at the start, the combination of green investments with a focus on people, with a focus on the skills that are needed, new methodologies, new ways of assessing the skills that will be needed, skills mapping going forward, involving the key partners, also the ministries for labor, ministries for education at a regional, at a national level, and really bringing together all the key partners that look at both the green transition, but also the transition for workers, for communities that are affected in this way. So with that, let me open the event today. Let me wish you a very interesting conversation. I know we will now hear from Katie a lot more about what each of us are doing in this area. And then, of course, we will have a conversation about how we can do more together, what the opportunities, what the challenges are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, sorry, I didn't change the slides. Okay, here we go. So yeah, as Barbara mentioned, it falls on me today to provide an update on MDB initiatives on just transition. So it's a little bit of an odd role to present on other MDBs' work, but we did want to give a showcase, a snapshot of what every MDB is doing. So I will present briefly, but of course I encourage you to engage with each institution to understand more on the details of what they're doing. I think collectively we can be proud of the progress that we've made on just transition in the last 2 years. And as we've mentioned, really try to focus on how we're trying to put this into practice. It's not an easy job. I think all of us can discuss some of the challenges that we've faced in doing it, but I think we've made good progress. So these are in alphabetical order as well, so no preference. So first, we have the African Development Bank. So in 2021, the African Development Bank launched the AfDB Just Transition Initiative with the support of the Climate Investment Funds. One of the things they started first with is with the African context, and we stress that just transition is really context specific. So for Africa, just transition differs in the African context because it's not about minimizing negative impacts of climate action, but more about maximizing development and prosperity from transformation actions. So the Just Transition Initiative has two objectives. First, it aims to agree to develop a definition that's suitable to the context of the African continent. And second, it aims to develop a just transition framework that will be integrated into the bank's operation and facilitate just transition consideration into projects. And with that, provide guidance and resources to member countries to integrate just transition into their national development strategies. The framework's currently being piloted in Kenya and Tunisia, and the Climate Investment Fund's Just Transition Toolkit is also being tested in the transport sector in Uganda. Second is the Asian Development Bank, where I'm leading the Just Transition agenda. So the ADB has looked at ways to implement Just Transition in the institution. We've recently, earlier this week, launched a collaborative design process to design a Just Transition finance facility. That finance facility has a number of aims, but it's really about finding fit for purpose finance that is focused on just transition with its primary aim. We also recognize at the institution that there's just transition aligned finance, and that we also have a lot of operations in health and social sectors that we can mobilize towards a just transition. We have an ongoing Just Transition technical assistance platform, which provides critical resources to support policy processes in country, and also the upstream analytical work that is really needed to inform integrated design of Just Transition plans. Our colleague in the region, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, has recently released their climate action plan, and supporting a just transition is an embedded focus of that plan. The approach to just transition has 4 critical elements. There's a strong emphasis on socioeconomic development that recognizes the rights and needs of less developed country, including access to secure and affordable energy. There's a focus on mitigating impacts of climate transition, and that includes infrastructure development to remediate, repurpose, or revitalize stranded physical assets, to reskill the workforce and support conventional companies seeking to reorient businesses. There's the support of new economic opportunities resulting from the transition, and lastly, to address climate impacts by leveraging various instruments to enhance the crisis response capacity of developing member countries. Our colleague here, Karel, is from the Council of the European Development Bank, so he can maybe expand a little bit more during the panel's discussion. But the CEB climate and social needs, they believe that these need to be considered systematically. So that includes mainstreaming climate-related issues in social investments, integrating social dimensions in all action, and to bridge climate action and social inclusion at CEB, they're looking to integrate social investments to mitigate the negative impacts of climate action, to emphasize support to vulnerable communities in social, health, housing, mobility, and urban development projects, to focus on improving communities' resilience to climate impacts and policies, and address social needs to foster public acceptance of climate policies. Next, we have European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, it was actually EBRD that spearheaded the work on the principles initially and bringing the MDBs together specifically on just transition. So the EBRD has a just transition initiative that aims to equitably share the benefits of the transition to a green economy and protecting those that will be affected most from falling behind. The initiative has 3 key themes that you can see here: green economy transition, human capital development, and regional economic diversification. And I think Barbara gave us those 2 examples of the key ways in which EBRD is actually implementing this in practice. The European Investment Bank has put ensuring a just transition for all as one of the overarching objectives of the Climate Bank Roadmap. EIB's Climate Bank Roadmap in the EU, EIB is supporting the implementation of the EU's Just Transition mechanism. And so it has, in some ways, a lot of experience in that actual implementation within the European context. So to date, it's implementing 9 just transition investments, and it's completed 11 advisory assignments and has 48 more ongoing to support the development of just transition projects. Building on its experience in the EU, the EIB is extending its just transition work globally to address unequal transition impacts, and also looking at pioneering a just transition approach to specifically address unequal burdens of climate change and adaptation actions. And I believe the EIB also has its own just transition event tomorrow. The Islamic Development Bank. So ISDB is launching its Just Transition Conceptual Framework and Action Plan that covers the period 2023 to 2025 at this COP. And that has been a process, I understand from colleagues at ISDB, at looking how to apply the principles within their own operational context and develop a framework for just transition for the bank. ISDB is also involved in several other just transition initiatives, which includes developing knowledge product that looks at quantifying the social and employment impacts of decarbonisation in the MENA region, and that's been done in collaboration with the ILO. Finalisation of a climate risk management framework, which looks at physical and transition risks, and continuing engagement on just transitions globally. New Development Bank has included just transition in its general strategy 2022 to 2026. It's currently working on developing its institutional approach on just transition and looking at how to integrate the high-level just transition principles into guiding its operations and activities. And last but not least, we have the World Bank. So the World Bank has developed a multi-sectoral approach for just coal transition across global practices. So this includes their energy, their social sustainability and inclusion, and social protection and jobs practices. And the approach is structured across three key pillars: strengthening institutional governance, supporting people and communities, and repurposing idled lands and infrastructure for new investments that diversify local economies. The World Bank's new approach is supporting energy transition. The scaling up to phase down approach, which maps out steps to support developing countries to scale up affordable clean energy and phase down coal-fired electricity generation. So that was a rapid walk through all of the MDB's approach. I guess in conclusion, having looked at it, when we started putting together the principles, one of the key points of discussion among the MDBs was that there was common elements, but there was also different elements depending on our operational context, our geographic context, what type of operations we did. And so the principles were intended to provide that high level guide, but they were also deliberately written flexibly so that each institution could then look to roll it out. We have a joint MDB working group on just transition, and I think we really benefit in that from being able to discuss how we have tried to apply those principles within our institution and where we see common things and where there may are differences. We've all made progress on just transition in the last 2 years. I think there's some way to go. But you can see as well that that mix of progress is between frameworks and guidance and guiding the institutions on how to implement, as well as actual concrete projects and developing pipeline and investments that support just transition. And those two activities are definitely happening in parallel in most of the institutions. So I won't take any more time. We'll pass over to the discussion. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the panelists who've been sitting with us here. So we have Karel Cronenberg, who's the Senior Technical Advisor at CEB, who will be moderating the discussion. We have Anthony Nyong, who's the Director of Climate Change and Growth at the African Development Bank. Laura Piovesan, who's the Director General and Deputy Head of Projects Directorates at EIB. And we have Eckhard Ernst, we're very pleased that you could join us as a last minute substitution from the International Labour Organization. Thank you very much. And we have Fernando Regalia, who's the Manager for Social Sector Department at IDB. So thank you very much, and I will pass over to you, Karel, for moderating the discussion.
Thank you. Let me see. Yeah, thank you, Kate, for this excellent introduction. I'm really pleased to have this excellent panel here. It's also very interesting because we learned from Kate that just transition is very context specific. And basically, this group represents three continents. We have Africa, Europe, and Latin America and the Caribbean on board. And furthermore, to make it even more complete, we also have, I would say, a representative of a cross-cutting issue from ILO, one of the key topics, labor and skills, that is related to just transition. What I would really like to know, because we are, and Kate, you were talking about we had a just transition working group, but I still think we have a just transition working group. And considering, I would say, the importance that is given at this COP to just transition, I think we may even want to speed it up. So what I really would like in this panel to have a bit of a discussion, what we have achieved, I would say, what is the current status? Lots of initiatives, lots of I would say mainstreaming going on in our organizations. Our organizations have also invested a lot in capacity and in resources on this topic. That will be basically my first question, and my second question will be very much also about what are the challenges. And we heard a lot of challenges during this COP as well. So have a little bit of a discussion on that too. So let me just start with the first question, and I just follow this order. And the first question is for Anthony Nyong. Also interesting, you also work for the Global Center on Adaptation, so it will be interesting to hear some of the context on that as well from the African Development Bank. And my question is, how have you navigated and contributed to just transition initiatives in Africa? And can you share some of your experiences and what are the lessons learned so far in your work on just transition?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good. Thanks. Thank you so much for the introduction. We've come a long way, let me just put it that way, in 2 years, because for the African continent, it's been a challenge that they look at the whole issue as being, contributing so little into climate change itself. And then when they got to the Paris Agreement, they carefully negotiated space and more time for a transition. But it's like that argument of more space, more time is being overtaken, and everybody's collapsed into one that we need to have a transition at some point. And then many of the African countries actually have also been pushed more into the just energy transition. That's where most of the countries have played in, because energy has been emphasized, maybe wrongly emphasized at this point, because our contribution to emissions from energy is about 2%, the whole continent. So asking and dwelling so much on that just energy transition actually takes people away from what the issues are. The real issues are the human beings that will be affected on the way to a net zero. We have net zero activities and we're putting so much money in it. We've created the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. We've done all that. But the element that deals with the labor force becomes quite a challenge. How do we integrate that? We've talked about the climate finance, which is completely different from the finance that we need for a just transition. For the climate finance, yes, what resources do we need to bring down emissions? But for the just transition, what resources do we need to build the capacity to restore livelihoods for skilled people? So what we've succeeded in doing first has been having a common understanding of what the just transition means for Africa. and having that buy-in, which we now have a very considerable buy-in into that space. As a matter of fact, at 2 o'clock, we have a program. The Nigerian Labour Congress is hosting a program that we funded them to look at, because Nigeria has developed a net zero strategy, but that net zero strategy has nothing on the casualties or the labor force, what needs to be done in that transition to net zero. So we've been able to finance a detailed study on what would be the implication on the society, on the labor force, if Nigeria achieves its net zero target by 2060. So that has been for us something we also need to understand. Then we've also been able to pilot the just transition toolbox in Uganda, because we're looking at places to understand what transitional risks could be in that sector. You know, it's part of what they have brought to their NDCs, that they need to be able to set policies that will drive a transition, a just transition across all the sectors. So we've picked the transport to see what could be those transitional risks and opportunities that Uganda might have in that transition, so that we know what to promote and what to watch out for. So currently, we're going to be doing that in several other countries and across several sectors, so that we learn and understand what works where. Africa is Africa, but Africa is not a country. Even countries have diversities within them. So there's not going to be something that says it worked in Uganda, so it must work everywhere. So we're careful in how we support these countries based on their peculiarities to learn what works and what doesn't work. What are the opportunities that come with it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me turn my chair a little bit. And then to my surprise, you were also talking about we have to put humans there, that we don't have any humans on the slide here, which I think next time the Just Transition Working Group need to decide basically to present the human side as well. Well, there are the humans, but I was more telling about the slides, the previous slide with the wind turbine. The focus has been far too much on technology only, and not enough on humans. And in that respect, it's also good to hear that the EIB just launched their global approach on just transition and just resilience. And we have Laura Piovesan here. Can you reflect a little bit more on your involvement in just transition efforts in the EU, and also your, I would say, just launched program, and how that will help you in scaling up your just transition efforts.
Thank you. And indeed, you're right. I mean, so far, the focus has very much been on the decarbonization itself and on the technologies, but increasingly, and at this COP in particularly, I do see a very strong focus on just transition. Seems to be the kind of most present hashtag in all of the communications around the COP28, because it has dawned on everyone that either the decarbonization is done in a way which is socially inclusive, or there will be no decarbonization and transition at all. It will not happen. I think this is particularly, I mean, it's clear everywhere globally, but it's also very clear in Europe. And the concept of a just transition has been embedded in European policy, notably in European Green Deal, and this has translated. This is translated also in the European Investment Bank on Climate Bank roadmap. Now, a clear way to implement this within Europe is the support we are providing to the European Just Transition Mechanism, which is supporting a just transition in the regions of Europe which are most affected by the phasing out of coal in particular. And we are supporting this through a large program of investments. We currently have 9 ongoing investments for a total of 200 million euros, but also, and I think that's important to stress, some 50 advisory assignments in Eastern and Southern Europe. And let me give you an example. So we, for example, the EB is supporting the local government in Western Macedonia, in Greece, to ensure a just transition for the region, which was indeed very much depending on coal. And this approach covers both the part of upskilling and reskilling the workforce, diversifying the economy, and of course the element of the green energy transition. And we are supporting that again with this mix of investments, but also advisory. So what have we learned from the implementation of the just transition mechanism? So first of all, as it has been mentioned by the previous speakers, we have a global challenge of the climate crisis, but the solutions need to be local, need to be embedded in the local context and take into account what is the local and specific territorial needs and prospects. The second lesson is that by building back better, and by better I mean in a socially inclusive way, we change this threat into an opportunity to develop an economy which is much more resilient to the impact of climate, and also we avoid replicating what has happened in the past in certain industries, in certain sector, where indeed there have been a number of imbalances, notably in terms of gender, but not only. The third lesson, and this is, it has been an important learning for the bank in transposing these mechanisms outside Europe, is that beyond the decarbonization, when looking at a socially inclusive approach, we also need to focus on the impacts of climate. So the adaptation, both policies and the adaptation solutions need to be equally just and equally socially inclusive. I think this is, really a very important lessons learned for us, and it has been translated in this new approach which we launched today, and I can then later elaborate further. Clearly, on how we do that, both partnerships are very important, and Barbara mentioned the platform, country-led platforms, but the MDBs jointly have launched at this COP. It's a very important tool, and it's also important to couple the investments with the advisory to prepare, to support the countries in developing the strategies, prepare the projects, but also accompanying the projects and the investments along the life to make sure that this approach is kept during implementation and not limited to the design phase. So constant work, I would say.
Thank you very much, and very interesting to hear about these latest development, and everybody. I think I assume it's also now it can also now be found online, the approach. So we're definitely going to look at it. Thank you. Well, we decide to go on with Fernando Regalia. But first, let me start with an apology, because in the hectic of all the slides, the IDB slide was missing. But the advantage is that we have a representative IDB here present. So I also give you the opportunity to say something about how IDB is actually implementing just transition at the moment. And after that, I would be very interested to hear from you on the specific characteristics of the Latin Americas and the Caribbeans. on just transition and also to ensure that well the climate activities there are done in a just way. So
Oh, thanks very much, and no need to apologize. Give me more chances to test something new that has not been already seen on the on the slides. No, thank you. So I'm going to come in this discussion from my head, which is the social, because I think this is important for us. Actually, this COP has been under social, within the AdB, we cover social security and social protection, labor market policies, education, health, gender and diversity, and migration. So has been a week of primes for many. We have the Health Day on Monday. Today we are talking about just transition with an emphasis also on social investment, and Friday is going to be on education, also pretty much a prime. So you might know Latin America and the Caribbean are really going through an accelerated process toward carbon neutrality, with some difference from other regions, because it's really focused especially on agriculture, forestry, transportation, but also on energy and of course and waste. So we discuss internally what will be the contribution of the social investment agenda to this important just transition agenda. And we just issue a position paper to really orient the work both in research and in operation of the social investments within this broader agenda. We perfectly know that this transition is going to bring positive and negative impacts. There are many upsides in Latin America, but also big risks of downsides because of specificity of the region. Extremely high level of informality, very high inequalities to start with, and very patchy social protection, contributing and non-contributory to start with, as we saw during the pandemics. So let me make, and our ILO colleagues probably will stress again this point. We did a joint piece of work a couple of years ago regarding the projection on net increase in employment. And if you take the lines, the headlines, it's very positive. We expect 2030, because of this movement toward the green economy and the blue economy, a net increase is more than 15 million jobs. Right? There will be net increase, so 22 million additional, about 7 million lost in other sectors. Also very interesting that 60% will require post-secondary education, and 80% will be additionally in male-dominated fields. So this is a major impact, and there will be impact on prices, so and consumption pattern, and these are also aspects that are very critical in our portfolio of intervention. And finally, fiscal issues. We talked on Monday about adaptation in health. Many of our countries, many revenues comes from oil royalties. So where we're going to find where we're going to push the fiscal reforms in all these areas, we are heavily involved across the bank. Let me also stress that there is a lot of work that I think we should do collectively, and ILO is spreading this effort in quite a few countries in Latin America, because as you know, in 50% of NDC in Latin America, we mention just transition. It's a very light touch. In those countries actually have long-term strategy. 50% have more robust analysis. So this is an area where we're working with ILO, with the CIF, with more analytical basis to substantiate the policy discussion that need to be carried out in this space. While we do that, we have 4 areas, and maybe in a second round I can go a little bit more in depth. We're really concentrating our efforts. There will be in Latin America no just transition if we don't work on secondary Secondly, technical education and vocational education. 6 out of 10 vulnerable kids do not finish secondary education. And today, I think an hour ago, the new PISA were released, and we're going to see about the gaps, for example, in math and science knowledge. And we know that Afro-descendant, indigenous people, and women are really at the most vulnerable. This is an area where we concentrate our portfolio, almost doubling, actually tripling our investment in this area. Then we are working on improving the ecosystem of training for those young adults and adults who already left education, improving employment services for reallocation, upskilling, and reskilling. I'm going to go later on some specific example. And the fourth area where we have done traditionally a big effort, which is social protection, contributory, non-contributory, we really need to rethink the use of some of these instruments. For example, we have support some countries to use the now famous 25 years long and famous conditional transfer, actually to wind down subsidies to fossil fuels consumption, for example, in Dominican Republic, while compensating using these instruments, compensate the most vulnerable for the expected impact on prices they're going to have. So these are some of the areas where we are actually concretely working, and we can go further detail later. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And well, you already mentioned ILO, and last but not least, in the first round, I'm looking very much forward to hear from their response, and also because Eckhard Ernst has also been involved in this priority action program on just transition at ILO. So it would be very interesting how that relates and what MDBs can learn from that. Well, please go ahead. Let's listen.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I mean, to your question, I can answer that because you have already heard that the MDBs already are learning from us.
Yep.
And I want to go a bit maybe more into some of the details. So what I'm really pleased to see is that the point that we are always been making in the past about the importance of the social and labor aspect to the green transition is really kind of becoming mainstream now. I think it's really important to stress that just transition is not an afterthought to the green transition. It's really part and parcel of that. And if for those of you who follow the discussion in Europe right now, you see that a lot of green parties are losing out because of the challenge that we have as an international community to convey the importance that we need to combine the two. And I think ILO has always been of that position that we need to be spearheading that effort, and we need to develop guidelines and recommendations along these lines. So, which is exactly what my colleagues have been doing in the past. And I just to remind you, and I think that goes a bit beyond what we just heard, is that it's not only about the number of jobs. It's also about the quality of the jobs. It's about the transition towards these jobs, and it's not only a skill question. It's obviously also a location question. The green jobs are often emerge in areas where we don't lose the brown jobs, if you want. And so the question is then, how do you actually move people towards the right location? So that brings in the question of social or social protection, all kinds of forms of transitioning. And then the last point, which is obviously very important from our perspective, is always it has to be done through social dialogue. Social partners have to be part of that transition in order to make sure, exactly as I said, to build that political buy-in. So as I said, the ILO has developed over the years these guidelines, and as already was mentioned before, I mean, we are working indeed together very closely with a lot of MDBs already in this area. So we are very pleased. It's at COP26. We were providing inputs to the MDBs in the transition principles that were just transition principle that was launched then. Last year, we were invited to join the launching of the ADB Just Transition platform, and And at this COP, which I think you, Katie mentioned it beginning, the Islamic Development Bank, as we are always also in the process of supporting them. So it's really good to see, but that's as was already said, that's at the high level for the moment. So we have these guiding principles that kind of inform, obviously, our partners and the MDBs on this. Now the question then becomes, and we started working with them to break this down into the operational framework in MDBs. And I think that's where, as was mentioned before, we have to then kind of identify exactly how this has been done concretely, depending on the geographical context, depending on the sectoral context, and obviously on the occupational structure. And that's where the real work actually starts. And it's identifying the guidelines is one thing, and I think that operationalization of these guidelines is a real challenge. And I wanted to make one point which is really important for me, and there's something that I discussed yesterday as well in a different venue, is that we are talking a lot about the transition in the energy sector, but that's actually not where a lot of jobs are. In any case, I mean, so the real challenge is that you have a lot of jobs. You mentioned informality in agriculture, for instance. 50% of global employment is in agriculture, and a lot of these jobs, if not all of them, will be one way or another being affected. So I think the challenge is really to kind of mobilize the resources, especially in countries that dispose of very little resources, to help these countries to identify the right mechanism and in order to implement the necessary changes, whether it's being setting up new training facilities, whether it's being setting up social protection schemes that are necessary in order to accompany this transition. So I think that really kind of grasping the size of the challenge is really something that we are trying to bring forward to our partners in MDBs.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you indeed for bringing this up, because the topic is getting broader and broader every time and every COP what we see, and also the time is running out quicker than expected as well. So for the second round, I would like to suggest to have a maximum of 2 minutes per intervention, and basically also to save time, I would basically just ask all of you the same question, and that is the question: where do you see the major challenges for the coming time? And you already tipped upon it, but where do you see specifically also for the region that you work? Do you see the major challenges, and how is your organization responding to these challenges?
Thanks. For us, it's a simple challenge that we talk about decarbonization all the time. Africa is not carbonized, and there is no need for our decarbonizing. Our challenge is, how do we keep Africa a low-emitting continent while growing our economy? And so that's what it is. And like my colleague has mentioned, I said it earlier, we're placing the wrong emphasis on energy. It's agriculture, as he said. And then 70% of Africa's infrastructure is yet to be built. This is the time for us to make sure that we build climate resilient infrastructure. That's where we want to see people transition to, not so much about emissions, but a climate resilient development strategy. And in doing that, we are working with ILO, if it doesn't know, to design a framework for jobs in the resilience space. When you talk about green jobs, it's about solar panels, about electric cars, about all manner of things, not so much adaptation jobs. So if we're going to push resilience for Africa, push adaptation for Africa, there should be jobs in that space to take people in. And we're doing quite a lot in that space with the ILO and with our own resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura.
Well, I can be very brief because I totally agree with what you said just now. And indeed, as I said, what we realized is that particularly as we are increasingly focusing outside Europe or increasing our focus outside Europe, we need to do more in adaptation. But also it is very important to bring this comprehensive approach where we look at the just transition together with the just adaptation. So this approach that we have now launched, and the challenge for us is going forward, continuing the implementation to it, applying it in practice, really aims to look at all these aspects that were mentioned and in a way with a double focus. On one hand, make sure that the climate adaptations policies and measures are inclusive. And the second one, making sure that as climate change impact are not neutral, then we do direct our actions towards the part of societies which are most vulnerable. So in terms of country, we will initially focus on LDCs, single island states, as well as conflict affected countries as the most vulnerable, but also the ones which have the least possibility to compensate. And then in terms of investments and policies, we would like to really focus, make sure that we have this lens of social inclusiveness in all our adaptation projects.
Thank you. And let me now give the floor to Fernando.
There was first ILO before. It's okay.
No, take that.
No,
take it.
two very quickly. One is more under control, and I think colleagues at ILO has already stressed this granularity of the analysis, and I totally agree. It's not just which type of job, the distribution, geographical, etc. But this is more under our control. I think we need to speed it up in order to really inform better the NP and the LTS. And the second, and we are really committed, is changing let's say the ecosystem of skill development, particularly in upper secondary education, tertiary vocational education. So it's a hard job to do, but we are expanding curricula changing, training teachers, in introducing pedagogies within the schools that really prepare these young folks for what is going to come in the future. This is a bigger transformation that we need to assure long-term and inclusive strategy, particularly for the most vulnerable, particularly for Afro-descendant, indigenous people, and a lot of girls are out of this field.
Thank you, Fernando. And let me then also pose the last question to Eckhard, related to also because you work on this priority action program. Where do you see the major challenges?
Yeah, I kind of finished my earlier remarks by saying that resource mobilization is really key, that the challenge is so big that we actually need more resources. But there is a good news to it, and something where I mean, just refer again to work that my colleagues have been doing, presenting at the last Biodiversity COP 15 last December, is on what is commonly known as natural capital or payment for ecosystem services. I think there's a huge potential there. And interestingly enough, it's the poorest countries often who have the richest natural environment that could benefit from it. If we properly frame this, if we properly develop a new financial architecture that helps them mobilize these resources and use them properly in order to spearhead that transition. And I think I want to give one example in this respect, which I find particularly disturbing, and where I think there's an immediate action is needed, which is Ecuador recently tried to introduce this debt for nature swaps. For those of you not familiar with it, the idea is really you can transform some of the sovereign debt into commitments of the countries to actually, instead of repaying the interest and principal, to use that money to restore their natural, or to conserve their natural asset, obviously in collaboration with the indigenous population, with the people who are actually taking care of these natural reserves. And I think that there's a lot of pushback in the international community, and I think institutions like yours, MDBs, can really help to make sure that there is a proper financial framework, there's a proper institutional framework that can help setting this up. And obviously in these frameworks, there needs to be an element of just transition to be recognized.
Yeah, please.
IDB has been at the forefront of this structuring, actually, with our guarantees. I think he's absolutely right. And join with policy that can actually even pay for conservation. And these are schemes that we are trying both in the Amazon and in Ecuador and in Colombia. So this is a very important point.
Thank you very much. Maybe just you, if you want to say some last words before I close the panel. Otherwise, I would just thank you a lot.
Maybe.
Yeah, I saw you thinking.
No, no, just sorry. Yeah, let me just close it that
Yeah.
sometimes we find ourselves in a difficult situation on the African continent. For instance, we're told solar is the solution, energy, and we say, okay, fine. Will it create jobs? Fine. How many jobs would it create downstream? It's those that manufacture and do all the things. That's where the jobs are created. So we are not pushing for any specific technology in that space, transition space. We will push for technologies that will create the jobs we want, bring the finances that we want, and grow our economy.
Thank you.
Just one word, because you mentioned at the beginning, okay, we talk a lot about just transition. Maybe it's important to keep our joint working group alive, and it's very useful. And I do see we have a common challenge around the data, but inform these approaches, and also how do we communicate the impact of these different approaches and common approaches and investments. So I think that could be an important focus for the working group to continue the work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very encouraging. I would like to give the word to Toro Kobu, but before we do that, first a big applause for this great panel and a deep discussion. Toro Kobu is going to make our closing remarks. He's Senior Director at the ADB, and a heavy task to close this after this interesting discussion.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this panel. So thanks to everybody. And actually, so Kate prepared some really good remarks for me to deliver, but everything was said in this panel. So I don't have much left to say. But I just really want to thank and appreciate what we have here because, 2 years ago, we agreed on the joint principles. 2 years ago, it was unimaginable to have this kind of group and knowledge sharing and coming back with what we've been doing. Lessons learned. And I totally agree. We need to continue this with the working group. For ADB, we got to learn from IDB on your Chile transactions on the private sector approach with NG. Even despite the time difference, we got to actually have a discussion among the technical groups to learn. And then in South Africa, of course, we've been discussing with the stakeholders there, learning a lot. And Indonesia, we've been working with the World Bank, IFC on the CIF Act for the just transition. And this this element that we're talking about, social dimensions and inclusivity and gender, labor, tertiary and TVET, this is really all coming together in the past year. So 2 weeks ago, we had an international skills forum in ADB, and there was a very robust session on just transition. And then last week, we had a gender forum in our headquarters. And again, one day's focus was on just transition. And it's not just about energy, it's agriculture, resilience, adaptation, risks, and transport. Can you imagine the transition and just transition support elements for transport sector if many countries going from road-based or no road at all to multi-transport integration and electrification of the vehicles. So very different sort of supply chain and skills needs, and that all needs to be supported. I really appreciated the comment on the need to operationalize this. And we've been learning a lot from ILO. Your work on this, actually, Kate has led a draft operational guidance on just transition. And we're trying to incorporate the lessons from the first real transactions to then issue that. And I'm sure our colleagues, MDB colleagues, are working on that. So in the working group, if we can share to make sure, because this is really beyond the principles, right? How do we make sure that our business processes are aligned and all our operations are aware of this? How do we do the capacity building of our own staff and also our counterparts? Because the absorption capacity is also limited right? Because our developing member country counterparts need to handle so much. How do we also align this with our safeguards? Because there's a lot that overlaps with environmental and social safeguard aspects and labor, health, standards. So that's another challenging aspect. We have to work on data and evidence. This has been really, really challenging. And disaggregated data is so hard to get on gender and also vulnerable groups. And so we have been putting in a lot, and thanks to our colleagues, together with the World Bank and other think tanks, we've been trying to collect the data that the governments don't have. But I think we really have to invest in this more. But as we operationalize, it will become more granular, and we will be able to share. This is where MDBs should focus our limited technical assistance resources to be able to gather that data and then integrate them and use that for just transition support. And it goes sort of hand in hand with the scaling up the resources that was also mentioned. We just don't have sufficient money available, right? So, there's not enough taxpayers' money and grants available. How do we create this financial mechanism? I think there was a really good suggestion on payment for ecosystem services. One of the things that we've been looking at in ADB with some partners is, there's always this argument on adaptation and mitigation finance balance, but in a way that's a zero sum argument because the pot is or the pie is too small. Actually, can we generate more funding for just transition, adaptation, resilience in partnership with the private sector? So, for example, you know, when we think about commercial returns, there's a lot more opportunity for private sector to make a commercial return in the mitigation space than the adaptation space. We all know this. Adaptation, of course, is like water and health areas where they can make money, but energy especially, there's so much of that upside potential. Well, if all the MDBs are working on enabling environment, addressing risks that the commercial sector can't take, so we put in this target, the public sector money, philanthropic money on enabling environment. And if private sector comes in, they can make a profit. Can we then have a certain charge on a success basis to go into broader just transition support and also adaptation, sort of risk reduction? So, these we're financial institutions. We were pretty good at coming up with these mechanisms, right? So can we work together to make sure that we're not just knocking on donors' doors? We can create this mechanism. So enough said. Thank you so much. We have so much experience together here, and we're working on it. So hopefully we can come back in the working groups, but together again and share that experience and share with our stakeholders, work with stakeholders and share with them also. Thank you so much.